Good evening and welcome to the fifth programme in our series, The Business of Excellence. Tonight we're going to look at entrepreneurship. To present our topic tonight we have Gifford III, whose book Intrapreneuring has introduced managers to the idea that you can be an entrepreneur whilst working within an existing company. To debate with him tonight we have Richard Branson, chairman of the Virgin Group plc, Anita Roddick, the managing director of The Body Shop plc, Dick O'Niens, chief executive of Baring Brothers Hambrecht and Quist, a venture capital company, and Ron Lord, director of management training at chartered accountants Arthur Young. Now, to introduce the topic, I'd like Gifford to tell us, what is an entrepreneur?
Well, entrepreneurs are the dreamers who do. They're not necessarily the inventor of a new idea. The important thing is that they are the people who bring it through and make something happen. And I think that this is an important issue for Britain, because the British have been for many years the most inventive people on earth. Almost any method of measuring inventivity, you find the British coming out ahead. And yet, since the 19th century, there's been a steady decline in the entrepreneurial spirit, the kind of dirt under the fingernails, it's okay to go out and do it. I think getting in the way are some myths about entrepreneurs. The primary one is that entrepreneurs are primarily in business to make a tremendous amount of money, and that it is greed, if you will, that is driving the entrepreneur. And so, because the pursuit of money is not highly esteemed in England, people see the entrepreneur as some kind of underclass, if you will, not worthy of heroic status, whereas, in fact, they are the missing ingredient to renewed British greatness. When you look at, you ask people who are entrepreneurs and you say, what's really going on? And they say, well, I had an idea and I was almost surprised to find myself in business. I was almost surprised to find that the task of doing it required me to educate myself and become a business person. That really wasn't what I had in mind at all. I was surprised to find myself making money. Howard Vollum, who is the founder of Tektronix, the American electrical instrumentation company, said, well, I got out of World War II. I had been a mathematician going into the war, and I emerged as an electronics buff. And the thing that really annoyed me was that the instrumentation wasn't any good. And so I said, I'm going to build instrumentation that's worthy of all the people like myself who have suddenly become thrilled by electronics. And he looked out of the windows of the vast Tektronix plant, which covers much of Beaverton, Oregon. And he said, I didn't intend to build all this. I would have been happy if I had just sold 200 oscilloscopes. If you look at J.C. Hall, allowing for a slightly sexist attitude, he said, if a man sets out only to make a lot of money, chances are he won't. And what he was trying to say is that entrepreneurship, if you're only pursuing money, the entrepreneur, the would-be entrepreneur, will tend to veer from vision to vision and not be able to hold their focus and not be able to go through the tough times. That it takes a connection to the deeper levels of the soul, a connection in which your idea, your product is somehow more meaningful than just a way to make money. What I'm saying is that a vision is a kind of a concrete thing of being able to see something that isn't yet. Inventors do the same. The best inventors create a very clear image of what they're inventing in their mind before they put it there. An inventor tends to move out into the future, maybe 5 years, and imagine what it would be like if people were using their thing. One inventor that I was talking to, who was the inventor of a new kind of portable personal computer, imagined himself sitting in his hotel room pushing the keys on this imaginary computer, and he imagined what came up on the screen. And he imagined the kind of software that would be necessary to drive those screens and the kind of electronics that would be necessary to drive those softwares. And that is, in fact, and the kind of satisfactions he would feel. A good inventor is out there with the customers to the degree that he puts himself in the customer's shoes. But something was missing from this vision. And what was missing was how you're going to get there. The poor entrepreneur has to leave the promised land and march all the way back to the present and begin slogging through all the details that are necessary to move that idea forward and say, if I moved forward here a little bit, would I be ahead of the game or behind the game? And choose. I think a lot of the initial moves are made in the shower, or driving a car, or sailing a boat, or some activity. All of these activities, incidentally, have something in common. There are times when there is no particular reason to feel that you ought to be doing something else, and at the same time you can't get your hands on paper, which is the times in which the imagination is most likely to flower, because you're thrown back. You have nothing else that you can use aside from your imagination to paint the picture on. And so the entrepreneur has to paint those pictures, making as many mistakes as possible in their mind, and then, because entrepreneurs are also impulsive action takers, having gone through what can be done in a reasonable amount of time in their mind, go ahead and try something and begin to move the vision forward. Unfortunately, I've never met an entrepreneur who can see clearly from the beginning to the end, who can tape the whole pathway and follow it the way they taped it. It always turns out that there was something wrong, that they hadn't seen it properly, and so there's a continuous process of readjusting the vision or changing your direction or seeing another way or hitting some kind of desperate moment in which necessity forces you to invent what may turn out to be the greatest part of your business. And people say that entrepreneurs are high-risk takers, that they are, the lucky ones are sitting in this room and the unlucky ones are scattered over the countryside. But it turns out that all the studies that we've done and others have done of the entrepreneurs suggest that entrepreneurs are not high-risk takers, that they are moderate risk takers. We spend a lot of time training entrepreneurs. And there's a game that we play when we're training entrepreneurs that illustrates risk-taking behavior. It looks a lot like the game of ring toss. Maybe you could imagine a peg on the floor over there and a tape stretched out like this, marked in feet. And perhaps it's a little foreshortened, but imagine that it goes back to 15 feet back here by Ron and that it's 1 foot up there by the peg. And the student comes in and we hand them 4 rings. And they take we say the purpose of this game is to get the rings on the peg, and you can stand anywhere you want along that line. Now, some people get it immediately. They hitch up their skirt or their pants, as the case may be, walk over, squat down like this, and just put all 4 rings on in one movement like that. You see, and they understood it immediately, right? They give you a big smile and a little bow. Gee, thank you very much. Others walk all the way back to 15 feet, and they fling the rings across, never getting anywhere near the peg. It's almost impossible to hit from 15 feet, and they bounce them off the walls and the ceilings. There are others who choose someplace in the middle ground. They've watched the other people, they've seen some of the mistakes other people have made, they've gotten an idea of how hard it is. And let's say they choose 7 feet. Well, the first thing that happens is their foot turns sideways so that they can get another 2 inches closer. And this is an important part of the entrepreneurial spirit. Why take risks that you don't have to take? They bend down, their arm goes out, and they reach way out like this so that they can get closer to the peg. And what you see there is a series of interesting things. Now, first of all, you say to them, well, why didn't you just walk up like those other people and squat down and drop the rings on the peg? Why don't you do it the obvious way? And they say, well, some of them say, really? Did you say that the purpose of the game was to get the rings on the peg? I didn't hear you. And that just only goes to show that entrepreneurs don't hear the rules, But the other part, the bulk say, yeah, I heard you. But then again, that was your game, and I didn't think it was very interesting, so I made up my own. And what's going on in Britain right now is that many of the games just aren't very interesting anymore. And people are playing the same old games, and we need people to make up the new games. And those are the entrepreneurs.
Anita, let's start with you. When you started Body Shops, I forget how many years ago it was, where did you think you were going to go? What was in your mind? What was in your imagination? Tell us about it.
For a start, everything Gifford has said I find and can relate to very well. There is no vision in terms of money. You actually think, well, as I thought, I had to work in this shop, I had to support myself and the kids. All I knew was that I should take £300 a week to break even and to buy in more stock. That was the yardstick, the only economic yardstick I had, because my husband was in South America. So I didn't know that you had to get a till. I didn't know any of those things, and I think therein lies one of the elementally successful aspects of entrepreneurship. They don't know how it's done. So number two, and they don't know they're doing anything special, and they're absolutely amazed when books are written by it, because it all seems very, very normal. You do not think about money, you think about surviving when you've got this idea that has gone out of the head, excuse me, into a little store. The other thing too, I think, is that you don't have the luxury of thinking, God, how would I be in 16 years' time? Because you're working your buns off to survive, to support yourself, and what you're doing without you knowing is that you're working practically for a year or two, and so you understand what you're at brilliantly, and you don't do what I think is the death of business in this country. You don't theorize. You have no theories.
You have no strategy.
You don't even, I didn't know what marketing was. Still don't know what entrepreneurship is. I ran to the, as I was saying to Gifford, I ran to the Oxford Dictionary on Sunday to try and work out what it was. And I think that's really important. I think I believe what you're saying is to be accurate. I don't think money is not a motivation. You break rules. One other little ingredient I would add, you have to have a slight sense of anarchy. You have to have, why not should be there all the time. Why can't I do that? Who says? So risk doesn't actually come into it, because risk is in this country is very negative. You know, you're structured at an early age not to take risk. One of the best definitions of risk I'd ever heard was an Arab definition, which is earn your daily bread.
Richard, you started your business, I believe, in a telephone box at Stowe, is that right? How did you, what was in your mind when you first started in business?
I mean, again, pretty well everything you said I relate very well to as well. I was never interested in making money, and I was never interested in becoming a businessman or an entrepreneur. I wanted to edit a magazine, and that was my vision or dream. And I soon realized that if one was going to edit a magazine, that you had to worry about the printers and the paper manufacturers and getting the magazine out and selling advertising space. And about 90% of my time was taken up being a businessman, and about 10% of my time was taken up being an editor. And I think since then we've always gone into ventures because we're interested in them. We've never gone into them because we think, you know, we could make a lot of money out of that particular venture. And I think because we're interested in them, they do that much better, and it means the people we've got working for us are willing to work long hours every day to make sure they work, and as a result we end up making, you know, very good profits.
So Dick, I mean, your business now as a venture capitalist is spotting entrepreneurs and backing them. What do you look for?
We look for human qualities. What we look for basically is someone who understands what they're trying to do. They have gathered around them 2, 3, 4 people who they know well enough that they can laugh together and cry together. So team is important. You don't find entrepreneurs that tend to be lonely people, so what we look for is ones who do have some affiliations with other people who can support them through what they're trying to do. We look for people who think of themselves as immigrants. In fact, I always stress the immigrant quality.
Immigrants to what?
Well, immigrants to the situation in which they find themselves. In other words, they don't look for the rules. In fact, they don't really care about the rules.
I'm laughing because during a period of my life when I was in considerable difficulty, I developed a slogan for myself, which was "Think like an immigrant." And whenever I came up to a tough decision, I said to myself, "How would an immigrant behave in this situation?" And it stood me in very good stead. It's
well, you're talking about the essence is that people who have never been there before.
Exactly.
It's
right.
all new.
It's all new.
Just as Anita said.
Exactly right. It's all new, and they're feeling their way through the situation. But they have enough support, enough emotional support from somebody who can help them with the numbers, or someone else who can help them think through the marketing implications of what they're doing. That there's an approach to business there, because I have to look at it as a business because I'm an investor. Okay, so I can't just take the dreaming and the emotional arguments. Because
so what happens to the real, I mean, the earliest, you're almost at a level of the middle stages of an entrepreneur, i.e. they've got a team, they've got a concept, they understand the numeracy. What happens to the people, if I'd come to you 10 years ago and say, look, I've got a great idea, with my kids in tow, and all I had with a name called The Body Shop, and you would have thought, God, is this a sex shop or what, or a garage? Would you have given me £10,000, £4,000? I don't think you would have.
No, I wouldn't.
No. No, and therein lies the big problem, because I think we don't really recognise...
I mean, it sounds to me like the old story that the banks only lend money to people who don't need it. Richard?
Well, no, I was just going to say, I think that maybe it's good that you didn't, because in some ways I think that the best entrepreneurs are the ones that have had that 10 years of struggling, and they've gone through, they've learned to survive. And I mean, I think both Anita and myself maybe went through 10 to 15 years of fighting, clawing, hiding under the table when the traffic warden turned up, hiding behind the door when the taxman turned up, and worrying about how to pay the bills at the end of every month.
So survival is the essence of the exercise.
Yes, and having learned...
Gifford?
I think the venture capital industry supports a specific kind of ventures, and there are kind of ventures which needs very large amounts of money, like £500,000 or something like that. And for that reason, their criteria are different. They're looking for people who need that kind of money, because you're in the business of placing money.
Right.
It doesn't do you any good to place £4,000. I mean, you'd never get rid of your stake at that rate. You just couldn't.
I mean, the answer is you're not in the entrepreneur business, you're in the money business.
I'm in the business of investing in entrepreneurial people who are trying to grow their businesses faster than would normally, above the average rate of growth.
Gifford, back to you.
I think we may over-glorify the intuitive aspect of entrepreneuring. When you do psychological tests on entrepreneurs, they always test equally intuitive and analytic. And I think that if people if they were to hear this and say that you are just intuitive, I think that they would make a tremendous mistake. And if you listen to these people over here, you'll hear a lot of analysis coming out of them, as well as intuition. When the data isn't there, when their time does not permit, entrepreneurs act intuitively. When they are finding which of their grand visions to back, there's a tremendous intuition, and it has to do with how it connects to the deeper values. But when it comes to execution, there's a tremendous amount of perfectly ordinary analysis that has to take place. And I would never put money in somebody who can't do rudimentary analysis and who thinks that every decision is intuitive.
Gifford, do you think it's true that most entrepreneurs see themselves as special? Themselves as special? Unique? Unusual? Odd?
Yeah, unusual.
Oddball? I mean, whatever word I would use.
It's interesting, because the way in which most entrepreneurs see themselves as unusual, it has a lot to do with odd as well as special. I think that one of the things that you notice is that entrepreneurs generally feel out of step with society. Somehow they don't quite fit in. And they are, in that sense, they're immigrants, and they're driven by not being able to fit into any of the normal things to create something of their own. It's almost as if the world is never quite right for the entrepreneur. They're never quite satisfied with the way things are, and so they're going to change the world, which is why they become change agents, I think.
Dick, you see more than most. Are they oddballs?
What I believe has happened is that a large number of people who made money through entrepreneurship 50, 60, 100 years ago sent their children through their wealth, their newfound wealth, to institutions that discouraged them from repeating the process.
Right.
And the interesting thing about the United States is that many of the successful entrepreneurs, and the number that I've heard is 80% of them, and you'd have to then redefine what success is, but we're talking economic success here, in fact are the sons and daughters of self-made people or self-employed people. Now, in this country, I find it very interesting to ask entrepreneurs who come to me for money, what did your father do? Which is a terribly British question to ask, but I'm not asking it for the usual reason. What I want to find out is what sort of home did they come from, and was the breadwinner in that home self-employed? And you do find that those people who are trying to break the mold are people who were in a mold that was already broken.
I mean, sorry, no, I was just going to say that...
What did your father do?
He was a barrister. I haven't had any any business in it. No, I mean, in England, I mean, there are pretty well no entrepreneurs, I think, that have come out of Oxford and Cambridge, and which I think backs up what you were saying. Most of the successful entrepreneurs left school early, or went straight from school into becoming an entrepreneur.
True in the US,
been through
too.
Anita, what was your background?
Immigrant.
Literally an immigrant.
My family were Italian, so I certainly had this business. They ran the restaurants, everything Italian immigrants do in the 40s, and we had a work ethic, and we had an immigrant, and also immigrant kids always worked. I do think too, one of the interesting common denominators of entrepreneurs that I've spoken to, and I may be up the wall on this, is that everyone has had responsibility pushed onto them at an early age at one time
and had
or another.
to carry it.
In my case, my father died at 10 years old, and all of the kids had to work, and that there was it. And I think maybe that might be an interesting debate of some kind.
The poor something wrong with the relationship with the father is very common in entrepreneurs. Either they didn't get along, they rebelled more strongly than average, or the father died, or something. And interestingly enough, this is equally true of women as men entrepreneurs. It is a problem with the father, not a problem with the mother. That seems to be the common denominator. And it probably has to do with problems with authority. And
it's the only thing I've disagreed with you so far. Unfortunately.
I'm happy for you in your case. And perhaps that's why you have such a smile all the time. I don't know.
Let me pick up that as a cue, Gifford, and move our discussion forward a bit. Problems with authority. Now, we've talked so far about entrepreneurs as individuals, starting their own businesses, getting off the ground, what sort of people they are, what makes them tick. Now, I'd like to talk for a few minutes about the concept of what you call intrapreneuring. In other words, the entrepreneur within the corporate organization.
Okay. Well, intrapreneurs obviously are just that. People who fill the entrepreneurial function, who do new things within a larger organization. Let me give you an example of an intrapreneur, maybe as a way of explaining it. One of my favorites is a guy called Art Fry, who invented those little Post-it notepads, the half-sticky little pieces of yellow paper. And he invented them in a very typically entrepreneurial manner. He was singing in the church choir, and he would mark the hymnal with little pieces of paper, and in the first service the little pieces of paper would fall out on the floor and he couldn't find his place in the second service. And so he decided that this was a problem which he personally had that he was going to solve, and he remembered that a number of years ago a friend of his had developed an adhesive which failed and was only half sticky, and he happened to have a bottle of it in his desk drawer because he was kind of a pack rat, which is common to entrepreneurs. And he made up he made up the hymnal markers. And it took actually some years to finally get all the formulations correct. And he went to his boss and he said, I got this great idea for these repositionable little pieces of paper. I know there's going to be some use to them. And his boss said, let's not tell anyone about it. Let's just keep working on it, which is the role, another important role in the organization, which is the sponsor, who helps the entrepreneur to hide,
the sponsor.
who feeds resources to the entrepreneur and protects them against the corporate immune system.
What's the corporate immune system?
The corporate immune system is the fact that in any large organization there are controls and systems in place whose purpose is to resist new ideas. just as the purpose of the immune system in the body is to spot foreign things that are different and kill them. And an organization has, and probably has to have, in the same sense that we have to have an immune system, an organization probably has to have a capability to stomp out new things and hopefully only leave a few of the new things surviving. Well, typical things began to happen with art. Finally, as the idea surfaced, they took it to marketing, who did some surveys and asked people if they'd like some very expensive, half-sticky little pieces of paper, and the answer, of course, was no. And I don't mean to suggest that marketing didn't do their job well, because there was almost no way to ask that question that wouldn't get the answer no, because none of us at that time could imagine what these things were for. I mean, it took me a month of having them sit on my desk to figure out what they were for. And I don't think that I'm that much dumber than everyone else. Art responded to this by doing something that he wasn't supposed to do. He immediately, but characteristic of the entrepreneur, he went beyond his job description and became the marketing man, even though he was supposed to be a research scientist. And he made up samples and began distributing them inside 3M. And he made samples of half-sticky tape and half-sticky notepads and half-sticky this and half-sticky that, and let people try all the different things. And then he made graphs and began counting how often people came back and asked for more. Then it turned out that there was a manufacturing problem. Now, he was not supposed to work on manufacturing. Other people were supposed to work on manufacturing. And he showed the people in the manufacturing function plans for the machines. And they said, look, there's no reason we're going to work on this. It would take 6 people 6 months to build that machine that you're discussing there. And we've already talked to the marketing people, and there's no market for this. Art got so mad at that point, so desperate, such an urge to survive, perhaps you might say, that evening he was running something else in a pilot plant. He pushed his official project aside, and using plywood and 2x4s and a little bit of wire cable and other things which he bought at Sears, he cobbled together a version of his machine. And when people came in the morning, there was the machine running, making Post-it notepads, which were supposedly impossible to make except on lab scale. And the people in the manufacturing function were furious. And they came running and screaming to Art's boss and said, that is a research scientist. He is not supposed to touch anything on the assembly line. What are you talking about? And so forth. And Art's boss and sponsor did something very characteristic. He said, if I had known that he was going to do this, I would have stopped him. Now, this was a complete lie, but showing that the sponsor perhaps has to be a little more of a politician, a little less direct and honest than the entrepreneur. In fact, Art's boss had stayed up all night with him, and if they'd only looked at the circles under his eyes, they would have known. But if I had known that he was going to do this, I would have stopped him. But unfortunately, he said, and then he paused for a moment and he said, I know you guys would never make a machine as ugly as this, appealing to their sense of self-esteem. He said, you would never build anything that bad. On the other hand, he said, the problem is that it works. And too many people have seen it now to burn it.
Now, Ron, you run a school for entrepreneurs in the UK. How do you do it, and how do British companies respond to this idea?
Well, the first stage is that we have to get the chief executive to want to let entrepreneurship in willingly through the front door. We then say, okay, we have to train the potential leaders of entrepreneurs, the godfathers, let's say, that Gifford was talking about. Having got to that stage, we then have to find and help find in the company the entrepreneurs. Now, they're self-selecting, like the entrepreneur, they're not appointed. So we find out who in fact thinks he's an entrepreneur, and then go through the process by a series of task-oriented exercises where he eventually selects himself, he stands the test of doing jobs himself, and is finally adopted by the company as an entrepreneur. Now, at that point, we say, okay, we'll start a school for entrepreneurs, not bricks and mortar, but a very, very task, action-oriented school. And it would probably be 20 days over a period of 8, 9 or 10 months.
I think what is astonishing, listening here, for the first time I'm hearing that there are schools in this.
I mean, Anita and
we're sitting here absolutely, we can't believe, I mean, we haven't, that this is going on. This is what
First
amazes
of all, the name entrepreneur in itself
it's
is
difficult to say anyway. But number one, how can any captain of a company sit in his chair, in his office, being paid billions and trillions of pounds and stop innovation? And what you're actually saying, that you're creating these schools of this climate of innovation through entrepreneuring, because some Dumbo is sitting there saying, we don't like it, it's not right,
well,
it's not your territory.
Richard, would you use these schools, or what do you do inside the Virgin Group? Because it's a large organisation, about 2,000 people now, is it? I mean,
yeah.
it's a big group.
I think the idea that the school seems very strange to me, but I'm sure that I think of a company that's maybe not working out, maybe needs the schools, but I mean, I believe that you can become a conglomerate as long as you have lots of little units within a company, and we find our entrepreneurs from people who've grown up with the company. So I mean, maybe somebody's been with us for 8 years, and they're just grown up, and they've become obvious leaders of their unit, and we then give them profit shares in that unit, and they then get a little building. And I mean, people say, well, can you take a group of companies from 300 million to £1 billion and still keep the flavour? And I think you can, as long as you have little buildings, and you have small groups of people, and you have highly motivated people, and you have the kind of people working for you.
You keep the team small, and you give responsibility down the line.
And also they have the kind of people who can become millionaires within a conglomerate. The kind of people who can run their own companies, are quite capable of running their own companies, but would rather work in an umbrella.
I think it's much harder when the founder of the company is no longer alive, and where the people who are running the company are, quote, responsible to the stockholders, which is some sort of abstract notion, and they get into analysis and trying to prove that things are right and so forth. And what we need to do is I mean, I don't worry about your companies in the spirit of innovation as long as you two are alive. I really think you'll work it out.
Absolutely.
But when you're dead, I do worry about it. I think that you'll find that your companies have...
but you train already. I have this imaginary red spot that goes on certain member of my staff on their forehead, and it's my little communication line. And some of our staff, and it may be a manager in Surfers Paradise in Bondi, there are certain people that I'm cultivating to protect the integrity, the soul of my company. And they will have, when I suddenly, burnout, they will have a certain responsibility. They're already being trained now to do a certain thing, to be, you know, they know they're special. I mean, I have a communication line with them, and they know what they're going to do. I think as long as you don't give a great company, let it be into the hands of accountants, you're safe.
But the sad truth is that in our own experience, in this country, and we know it's happening in the States and Europe, is that you get a situation where a company which is mature, has grown, the bigger it gets, the better it does, the more it understands its market, the more predictable everything is, the more it can forecast into infinity. It can run a tight ship, nothing wrong with that. That is protecting the existing business. Now let's do away with that, but that's one end of the spectrum. You're representing the other end of the spectrum. Now the reason there is a need for the school is that we have to be able to teach these large companies, which are pyramid-shaped, to be schizophrenic enough, or change lingual, if you like, to be able to put one on top of the other and simultaneously behave as both. As Tom Peters or Drucker would say, loose tight. You don't have to change the organization to be able to do it, but you do have to get into the heads of top managers and those below them. They have got to let their entrepreneurs use the organization as if a child would use a climbing frame.
Can I shift the discussion a little bit now and ask Gifford to talk for a few minutes about how you encourage and reward and motivate these entrepreneurs, be they like Anita and Richard, people who started their own businesses from scratch, or be they entrepreneurs within large companies?
I think that most people feel that the reward problem may be the reason why entrepreneuring will never work in the first place. That, again, it's based on the idea that the main thing that entrepreneurs are after is money, and they say, well, we're never going to pay our entrepreneurs, never going to make them as rich as some of the people who are sitting over there. So therefore, the real entrepreneurs will immediately leave and will never be willing to do it for someone else. And since it turns out that entrepreneurs are not primarily motivated by a desire to have become enormously wealthy, I don't mean that, you know, people are people. Everybody wants more money is better than less money, but I'm saying it's not the only thing which is going on. What they're really saying is, I want to realize my dreams. We interview people who have just left our clients and are setting up their own business and ask them why they left. And the story is always the same. I tried to do this, they stopped me. So I figured there was something wrong with the idea. So I tried to do that, and they stopped me. So I figured there was something wrong with my boss. Then I got a new boss. So I tried to do something, and they stopped me. And this time, generally about the fifth, I'm simply too angry, and I'm not going to let them do this to me. I'm going to show them. I'm going to go out there and do exactly what I said I was going to do, and I'm going to prove to them that it was a good idea. And by the way, I'm going to waste this business.
The idea is more important than the position.
The
idea is more important than the job.
vision of what needs to happen becomes a dominant force, and that's why entrepreneurs leave. So one of the most important things to do about entrepreneurs is to encourage them to do the things which they know they have to do. If they can do the things they know they have to do within the context of the organization, they probably won't leave. Now, when you're building a reward system for entrepreneurs, the most obvious thing to do is what Anita was talking about, which is recognition. Put it in the paper. Now, surprisingly enough, you'd think entrepreneurs are such inner-directed people that they wouldn't care what other people think, but this turns out not to be true. I have seen very entrepreneurial people weep because the chairman put in a good word about them, and it was such an acknowledgement to them, to their group. And it's often
it's like your bunch of flowers, in fact.
Yeah. So I think that we can build recognition systems, and the more the better. And I think that you want to set up your reward system so that everybody can be a winner. The worst thing that these compensation consultants do is they try and put everyone on a scale so that we can have one form of measurement, which immediately denies most of the people in the company any opportunity to feel good about themselves. So try and make it so that everybody can feel good about themselves, so that everybody can feel recognized in different ways, for different kinds of things. The second thing is that probably the most powerful reward that you can give an entrepreneur is freedom. Essentially, people will do a great deal more for freedom than they will for money. And so what's happening with good sponsors or godfathers, or with people who get little red stars or red dots put on their forehead or whatever it is you go to them and you say, you know, you've done something special, and as a result of this, You need not worry that your ideas will die. I will find a way to get the funds through to you, to get the permissions through the system. And this is what you need to say to entrepreneurs, that as a result of what you have done in the past, you have something. We actually have structured something which we call intra-capital, which is a form of reward which comes as a one-time budget, a one-time discretionary budget. Here is some money which is set aside for you to use to pursue your ideas on behalf of the company. If you spend it, it's gone, so you might as well be frugal with it. But if you don't spend it, it doesn't disappear at the end of the year like the average budget. It's there as your reward in the same sense that an entrepreneur gets capital. Here's where I think Adam Smith completely misunderstood capitalism and set us on a wrong track, which has lasted until this present time. He said that entrepreneurs are basically moving towards society's needs by trying to satisfy customers, and so greed drives us to do what is socially good. And he sees entrepreneurs as seeking money, as if you were going to spend it on the Riviera and on fancy cars. In fact, what entrepreneurs would do with money is they take another vision and they start it. Capital is a form of freedom, not a form of wealth in the traditional form. It's a measurable, tangible form. It's an incredible invention to come along and say that our society rewards people who perform, admittedly according to marketplace standards, but rewards people who perform by giving them the right to try out their ideas without ever having to ask anybody for permission. They can do whatever they please.
I wish you could come and do all my interviews. You sum it up so well.
Dick, is it your experience that entrepreneurs are actually not interested in money, or are they?
In this country, entrepreneurs feel as though they should give a positive answer to the question, do you sincerely want to be rich? and the reason they give that answer, I believe, is because it's a part of breaking the mold. It's a part of being un-British. Again, it's a part of playing the immigrant role. Because the general reaction in this country is that you shouldn't want to be rich. In truth, though, I think I agree that the ones that have that little motor running inside them, and the idea that they want to pursue with tremendous persistence, I don't think, in their heart of hearts, it is the possibility of being rich that is really driving them. Where this country, in fact, is still a long way from being a truly dynamic and entrepreneurial economy, is in we haven't had a second generation of Anitas and Richards in the last 10 or 20 years, and it would be interesting to see if one of them got tired of what they were doing, what they would do next. The chances are, if the American model is right, they would not do nothing. They may do nothing for a few weeks just to have a rest, but after that, they would start applying their wealth to a new startup and a new situation, and they may not, in fact, use much money to do it.
I don't think that entrepreneurs don't want money. I think we can overcorrect. Of course, entrepreneurs want money. They're like anyone else. I think the important point is that they are not unnaturally greedy.
They're not
they have higher values. And people think that of entrepreneurs as kind of dishonest lowlifes. And I think that just the reverse is true. The entrepreneurs that succeed are often scrupulously honest, are often, in fact, painfully honest, to the point where it is embarrassing to be around them at times, because they see the emperor without any clothes and they have no qualms
Anita,
about stating
what do you think?
Well, I sincerely believe that it is back to this damn trivialization of business in this country. When I won the Businesswoman of the Year award, the trivialization I got from the press, the award for the small woman, the comments about my curly hair, not the fact that I employ 1,000 odd people, you know, always it's money, it's measured, you know, as if I came in from, you know, some camp, from rags to riches. They never talk about real achievement or innovation. The press only want to pigeonhole you in terms of success, which is measured by wealth. And it gets terribly debilitating, and it's worse for me than I believe for Richard, where he's treated a little, vastly more seriously. They want garbage comments from me about how does a 40-year-old woman deal in a youth-orientated society, and they don't actually feel that a woman has anything important to say. So I mean, I think the press Certainly the schools are at fault too. There is no sense of business experience in schools. There should be GCEs and setting up your own business. And there's nothing being done. And the worst culprits in the schools are the careers people. You know, we're all saying the same thing, and the government doesn't move its
Well,
bums
they're strongly
to change
Oxbridge orientated, aren't they?
And I will not employ one more person in my company that's come in via the Harvard route or any other route at all. I want them to come in from the shop, from the street. And I think now, I mean, I've certainly learned that in 10 years.
Richard, I mean, you've made a lot of money from a very successful business career. Where do your awards come from? Are they financial, or, I mean, what do you actually aim to get out of life as a businessman, as an entrepreneur?
I mean, I think, sounds a bit, but it's the satisfaction of doing something well. I mean, you set yourself a challenge, I mean, say the airline, and you have that tremendous satisfaction 2 years later of making it work. And I mean, obviously, it's satisfying if with both of us. I think because we've sort of struggled from and seen it being successful. One can have a drink with one's friends who built a business up and say it's great to have done well. But the actual monetary rewards, I think,
But not at the top of the list.
they're not. Well, I mean, they give one freedom to be able to. To be able to have an idea in the bath in the morning and put it into operation by the evening. I mean, that's about it. I mean, you can only eat one meal a day, and you can only. I mean, if you are an entrepreneur, you're unlikely to get more than 3 weeks holiday a year, and so you can only spend so much money in a year on personal things, and so it's much more the freedom it gives you, I think.
Gifford, a last word from you.
Well, I think that, I don't know even where to address it. I think that in the information age, we're moving into a time of constant change where the most important competitive factor an economy can have is the ability to respond innovatively to change. It's the most important factor that a company can have. You know, I used to keep score in what I would consider to be a very British way. I go to a cocktail party, I have a new idea, I look at the person next to me and I tell them my bright idea, they look and say, oh, what a clever young man that is indeed, and I go, that idea is done, now let's move on to the next one. And I think that we have to get past that method of keeping score where the cleverness of our ideas somehow matters and get to a thing where it only counts if you do something about it.
Really, it all boils down to finding and encouraging the dreamers that do. Thank you.